I'm that sort of woman, then get out right now.
Take it easy. Nothing has ever happened between Daniel and me. But if he happened to notice me, it would be because he is no longer interested in you.
On the next episode...
Boom Chakala! Grab a Rock Boom, check under the cap, energize and win smartphones, flat screen TVs, Rock Boom gear, motorbikes and millions. I mean millions of cash. What you see is what you win. Boom Chiki! Boom Chakala!
All right, I'm glad you're still with us here on Morning at NTV. I was having a light moment with my guests, and of course, I'll be introducing her very shortly as we undertake the Take Note Popularizing Climate Justice Week. Now, climate justice means putting equity and human rights at the core of decision-making and action on climate change. The concept has been widely used to refer to unequal historical responsibility that countries and communities bear in relation to the climate crisis. It suggests that countries, industries, businesses and people that have become wealthy from emitting large amounts of greenhouse gases have the responsibility to help those that are heavily affected, particularly the vulnerable communities and countries who often are the ones that contribute less to the crisis. This is, of course, in line with what is being described as the Climate Justice Week, that is climaxing on Thursday and Friday. With me on site is the head of programs and fundraising at Action Aid International Uganda, Mercy Grace Munduru. Many thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here.
Away from the conversation that brought us on air in very, very good spirits, what is Climate Justice Week? But before we get to the week, or rather, let me get to the week first, and then I'll understand what climate justice really is.
Yeah, climate justice really is the concept that recognizes that climate change disproportionately affects people, especially low-impact communities. So we are looking at the fact that whereas climate change is a cross-cutting issue,
That's right.
its impact differs from one community to another. We know that different communities experience vulnerabilities differently, and so when climate change happens, and its impacts definitely are not the same.
That's
For
right.
example, we know that there are low-income communities that are living in swamps, for example. We know that there are communities that are already living in poverty. So imagine the extreme disasters that are happening right now. That means that you are adding on a layer on the vulnerability they're already experiencing. So climate justice ensures that we recognize that there are already existing inequalities, and so we have to work towards addressing the root causes of climate change as a mechanism to ensure that, you know, we deal with the inequality that happens when these impacts are extreme, especially on the most vulnerable communities.
Okay, wow, that is quite interesting. Should be involving a lot of intervention by multi-sectoral actors. So how can we effectively communicate the objectives of climate justice to the diverse audiences, including those who may be less familiar with the aspect itself of climate justice?
Yeah, I think most importantly, first of all, is to look at the context and the times. Before this year, climate change looked like it was a foreign concept, like we could not relate to what climate change is, whereas there were occurrences around us. I think especially us in the global north, we did not take seriously the fact that we are heavily impacted by climate change. But now, with the extreme climatic events, with the change in weather patterns, the things that are happening right now, it just becomes imperative on us to have honest conversations about climate change. If you look at the heat waves that happened earlier this year, and now you look at the flooding that is happening in Uganda, but also in the East African region and other parts of Africa. You look at drought last year. These are things that are actually now biting us directly. Our farmers are complaining that weather patterns are now changing. People don't know when to plant. People don't know when to harvest. And so having climate change conversations when people can relate to it, for me, I think is the most effective effective way of passing the message, because you have to unpack the big language around climate change, relate it to actual events that are impacting people. Making sure that you unpack this information, make it understandable, especially to the last mile person. That goes to, you know, the language used, that goes to simplification of information, and also different ways of communication, including illustrations, and communicating in ways that communities understand. Because guess what? At the end of the day, they are the key stakeholders that can help to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So their involvement means that you must communicate with them. You must use events that relate to them to ensure that the message actually goes home. But also you must recognize and acknowledge their efforts already, the indigenous knowledge and cultural practices that communities have already been using to adapt to the changes, you know, we see today. Yeah.
Okay, no doubt the Climate Justice Week is a very convenient vehicle in achieving much of what you are talking about. But for how long has this been practiced, the Climate Justice Week? Is it something we're beginning this year? And if you don't mind, also take us through exactly what goes on during this week.
Yeah, so this is the first time we're going to have the Climate Justice Week of Action.
Okay.
We felt that it was important for us to localize issues around climate change, give our people, the citizens, and especially frontline communities, the opportunity to highlight challenges of climate change. You know, last year during COP28, I went to COP, but the conversations around COP mostly centered on who has gone, how much have they spent, how big is the delegation.
It was interesting, yeah.
Yes,
no doubt.
how big is the delegation. People were hearing about loss and damage, but people could not relate to what that means for us locally.
That's right.
That when you see Ugandans going to that space, what does that mean? What have they gone to do? What are the discussions happening there? And so the Climate Justice Week of Action was inspired by the fact that we felt we needed to do more for people to appreciate and understand climate change as a concept and its impact on our communities, but also find their voices in these conversations. Most importantly, to build the voice and agency of the frontline communities to communicate their issues, but also an opportunity for them to, you know, bring some of the indigenous knowledge to the public space, to cross-learn with one another, and for us to be able to also influence policy outcomes for us as a country. So what has been happening is we've had activities at the regional level where we've directly mobilized communities and done trainings for smallholder farmers, done awareness sessions at local level using local media, but also directly reaching the most vulnerable communities, including communities in the refugee settlements. So there's been a lot of capacity building happening at that level. We have also done cross-learning between smallholder farmers from one location to the other and sharing experiences. So what is happening this week now is we are, first of all, bringing together people from across Africa. So we have people coming from Zimbabwe, we have people coming from Kenya, we have people coming from Tanzania and other countries. We also have farmers and frontline communities coming from all across Uganda. And then we have policymakers, we have young people, we have women coming together to undertake a series of events. Part of what is happening is the discussion we're having now using the media to just pass general information on climate change. And then we are going to have a climate justice march where we are going to have key messages from indigenous communities about the impacts of climate change, but also their call to action. At the same time, we are going to have conversations between policymakers and the people affected by climate change. We want there to be climate accountability. We want our people to hold our governance systems to account for failure to prepare communities to respond to the impacts of climate change. And so we are going to have these interactions across policy, and then most importantly, we're bringing farmers and they're coming to exhibit their local knowledge. What are those traditional practices that they have harbored over time that have helped them to
Offer some
adapt
kind of
to the
resilience.
impact. Yes, we want to see how communities are building resilience using their knowledge, and how is scientific knowledge and indigenous knowledge, you know, how are the two interacting in ensuring that communities are more resilient. So you'll see farmers with hens, with goats, with food items, demonstrating organic, and also the importance of, you know, organic farming, why that is important, why it's important to use resources available to them to build their own resilience. Yes.
Interesting. On a lighter note, somebody will ask, will these farmers be taking back the hens and the goats?
Well, we have to buy them because there's an aspect of livelihood. And that is what we're emphasizing, that in order to deal with, for example, vulnerabilities, if you see, for example, the most impoverished communities, when the impacts of climate change occur, they are even more affected, because guess what? They cannot afford food in those moments. They don't have health insurance. They cannot live for another day. And so if they are using their indigenous knowledge to build resilience, part of that means that there has to be an aspect of economic empowerment for the local farmer. We want to see that they are also, you know, economically empowered. So we are going to have to invest and ensure that they don't go back with those goats, and that they at least go back with resources that can help them diversify their farming practices even more.
All right, no doubt this particular advocacy style and initiative is commendable, and education as well as awareness raising play a very critical role. But allow me go a little bit deeper into the aspects of long-term commitment, especially on the part of governments and other stakeholders. There is a debate that is going on around the world that climate change is happening in such a way that you cannot falter states and governments' actions. That means all aspects regarding disaster preparedness and crisis management. Some governments don't want to be seen to, or rather present themselves as having all the solutions, because it's happening everywhere. So how can you dare say we are not doing anything on this? Are you going to falter the United States? Are you going to ask Turkey? Are you going to ask Dubai? Come on, they're saying cut us some slack when it comes to action. And therein is the gray area when it comes to long-term commitment in terms of the action plans that are going to be rolled out. I do not know whether Action Aid International has a specific plan that is different from what governments could at times dismiss at any one point in time.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I want to respond to that just from where you stopped. So Action Aid has been running a campaign called Fund Our Future. This campaign really emphasizes, first of all, the fact that we cannot talk about the climate crisis without finances.
That's right.
Because climate change in itself has impacts. These impacts need solutions. The solutions need money. But where is this money coming from? Which is the bigger question. And interestingly, and as a world phenomenon, much as everybody acknowledges, nobody denies the impact of climate change, nobody denies the extent to which the disasters are affecting communities, but little money is being put to finance the solutions. And yet we see today that more financing is going to fossil fuels, industrial agriculture, which are the biggest contributions to emissions. And so the Fund Our Future is about saying that we need to follow the money. We need to see how the money flows from the big banks to the big corporations to different public and private investments. How does this money flow? We realize that the world's biggest investments are going towards funding fossil fuel investments, and we also see a lot of it going into industrialized agriculture. These account for more emissions than any other thing. And Africa, is the global south in general, not just even African countries, is bearing the brunt because we are hosting these big projects. The projects that attract the most money, even in our own local context, are projects that contribute to these emissions. And as such, this campaign is aimed at calling out these corporations and saying, redirect this money to where it can cause less damage to our environment. For example, instead of investing in fossil fuels, why don't you invest in renewable energy, which will even help us achieve our goals, our emission goals by 2050 more faster, but also it's less harmful to our environment. But also to mention that we contribute the least to these emissions. The countries that contribute the most are doing the least to fund the solutions. When we see flash floods happening like they are now, how much of that, or how much of the global financing systems are investing towards helping communities to recover from these losses? When a farmer in Arua is impacted by a flash flood, how much of that money that will help them recover is going to come from the very countries that are causing these emissions? We can run away from this conversation, but when the disasters happen the way they are now, you realize that it has little to do with us. So we're saying, instead of funding fossil fuels, fund renewable energy. Instead of funding industrialized agriculture, fund agroecology, which is really a concept where nature interacts, you know, with what is around them. So communities practicing safe farming practices that do not require chemicals, that require, you know, organic things around them, that communities can farm organically, that they can strengthen food systems. And also agroecology gives us the opportunity to incorporate culturally appropriate diets, because when a farmer is practicing agroecology, they have the opportunity to grow foods in that area. For example, if we know in the central people eat matoke, that means part of an agroecology practice means that the farmer will have foods that they often eat. That helps to strengthen the food systems, but also there are forward linkages, like, you know, the economic benefits of these practices. So we are not just calling out these big corporations, but we are also offering alternatives and saying, look, let us look towards agroecology. And as Action Aid, we're not just leading this campaign. We've established 5 agroecology centers in eastern and northern Uganda, and also West Nile, including the refugee community. They're hosted by local farmers, and we are running these agroecology centers as a point of reference to demonstrate that what we are proposing works, and it is working. Can government of Uganda invest more in communities to ensure that more communities embrace agroecology? But can we also continue to hold these corporations accountable and say, look, channel the money where we can be safer, where we can further protect our environment?
All right, thank you very much. You've done pretty well, especially on that regard, because I was going to ask next what the innovative approaches, the best practices that are being adopted are, and how they enhance community resilience. That takes me now to the issue where discussions on the platforms, especially before the cameras, on international conferences, including the COP28 that ended, and of course many others that are held within the same steed, is different from the talk in the hallways after the cameras are gone. And that is where the reality comes in, you know. This particular ability to transition to low carbon economy for nations that are still discovering that fossil fuel could spur development, and they are being asked, hey, stop. Yet those that are asking that question or need or calling for a halt are much of the development they are enjoying is down to fossil fuel. And it's causing a bit of trouble for the global south to understand the kind of messages that the global north wants us to take on, especially when it comes to this transition. How is this being dealt with by sector players, including Action Aid International?
I think we emphasize the just transition. That just transition means that we acknowledge that transition cannot happen overnight, that it has to be contextualized. You need to take each context as it is. You don't propose blanket solutions, but you are able to appreciate context and offer alternatives above all. That you're not just asking for one thing or speaking against one thing, but you're offering an alternative. And so for Action Aid, part of our just transition is the fact that even while we are asking for investments in renewable energy, we are also acknowledging that universally the issues around energy access are still contentious. Even here in Uganda, for example, the West Nile region is not connected to the national grid, so they do not have electricity. And so when we are talking about transition, when there is a community that still does not even have access to energy, that will be hypocritical. So we are investing in energy democracy, ensuring that we give communities voice and agency to demand for what is due to them, for them to be at the forefront of demanding that they access these services, but also to influence global discussions towards a just transition. That let us think about the justice in climate, which acknowledges the difference in context, and also allow countries to go, but also invest in the solutions.
That's right.
Yeah, you cannot tell us to move here when you're not investing in those solutions. I'll give an example with adaptation, for example. The other climate financing mechanisms have been such that they go more towards helping countries to plan. And so this has been the top-down approach over the years. And so today we are now asking that you have to have communities participate in conversations on adaptation. It should not happen top-bottom, it should be bottom up. So that is why when we go to those spaces, we take the voices of indigenous communities, we take them to that space to speak about their realities, so that we approach the climate justice conversations from a contextual and a just transition perspective.
All right, second last question. In light of the victims who are grappling with the adverse effects of climate change, but especially in cases where much of the adversity has been occasioned to them by specific individuals or state actors. Is there a legal framework that is different from the mainstream that allows for expediting some of these cases so they are heard quickly, to allow for communities to undertake the transition as quickly as they can, but most importantly, to stay resilient? For example, if a community has been attacked, or some adversity has happened and it is a result of an industrial complex, activity, how quickly does the law or the justice system come in to ensure that these ones are actually attended to?
Yeah, that already fits within our broader legal framework. A very big part of climate justice is also protection of rights and acknowledging elements of social justice and also gender dimensions to climate justice, that when, for example, big projects happen, there are issues around land, natural resources that affect individuals or communities as a collective. So the work around corporate accountability is a key component of what we do, but also human rights related protection measures and mechanisms available in Uganda's laws. And I know that Uganda has a very good legal framework that addresses human rights. And so we have to be at the forefront of ensuring that communities are accessing justice, especially where their rights are violated, where corporations are not sticking to the commitments, including national level commitments to protection of rights, even as they advance these big projects as well.
Okay, very last question. Where the Justice Week events are going to climax?
Also, we have the climax events happening in Makerere this Thursday and Friday. We shall have a climate justice march, and then we will have conversations that will happen at Makerere University, and we are having information packs and conversations happening online through the official Twitter handle of ActionAid International Uganda. You'll find all the necessary information, including the programs and how they're going to run, the key speakers and the key topics. And so be sure to follow that. But we hope to see everybody at Makerere at 10 o'clock in the morning.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mercy Grace Ponduru, Head of Programs and Fundraising, ActionAid International Uganda, for sharing your perspective and, most importantly, enlightening us on Justice, Climate Justice Week and everything that you're undertaking in that state. Stay with us. We'll go for a break, but when we return, we shall go into our Kickstarter and Nambole approval. What does it mean for national sports? I'll be back.
The Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities, through its Department of the Museums and Monuments, is proud to announce the highly anticipated celebration of International Museum Day 2024, IMD 2024, where Uganda joins the rest of the world. This year's celebration will be held in Soroti City, Eastern Uganda, on 18th May 2024. As part of this year's celebration, the Department of the Museums and Monuments will host a talk show live on NTV Uganda this Wednesday, 15th May 2024 at 3:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. focusing on the theme, Museums Shaping Knowledge for the Future. Join us as we underscore the significance of museums as dynamic educational institutions fostering learning, discovery and cultural understanding. And the focus will be on the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. You can follow the conversations on hashtag IMD2024.
On the next episode
Is brought to you by
Boom chakala, boom chiki, boom chakala.
On the next episode
Place and the circumstances. I'm gonna respect your decision and control myself. But this abstinence from you is driving me crazy.
You always make me smile. I mean, even in the worst moments,
Well,
Martin.
don't you forget that, okay?
I didn't decide to fire anybody. We were fighting. The gun fired itself.
Yes. But you were holding the gun and you were the one who fired
Yes,
it.
but the gun was not mine.
Let's see what's going on here. The interrogation is private.
Without the presence of my son's lawyer, are you threatening us perhaps, Mujica?
Just a question. I would like to know how the patient Samuel Fonseca is doing.
I'm sorry, you better speak with the doctor.
And if you're going to try to punish Gonzalo just because he saved me, you are punishing all the women who are suffering violence in this country, who are victims just like me.
All right, okay. I don't care about this feminist treaty.
I love you both. Thank you, attorney.